Welcome everybody to the ONTPD Virtual Cafe. Our topic today is Program Evaluation Committee, and I am Melissa Bozerman from the University of North Carolina, and along with Brooke Vergalis from the University of Virginia, we will be your moderators today. We are fortunate to have two guest panelists with us. First, we will welcome Wayne Price. He is professor and program director of the Neonatal Perinatal Medicine Fellowship at the University of North Carolina, and Dr. Heidi Karpin, who is an associate professor and associate director of the Neonatal Fellowship program at Emory University. As I mentioned, our topic today is program evaluation committees, and I thought we could start the conversation by reviewing the ACGME requirements for PECs. So ACGME requires that the program director must appoint the program evaluation committee to conduct and document the annual program evaluation, or APE as we call it, as part of the program's continuous improvement process. PECs are composed of at least 2 program faculty members. At least one of the faculty members must be a core faculty member, and at least 1 fellow. The responsibilities of the PEC are to act as an advisor to the program director through program oversight, review of the program's self-determined goals and progress towards meeting them, and also guide ongoing program improvement, including developing new goals based upon the outcomes and review of the current operating environment to identify strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats as related to the program's mission and aims. And some might remember the terminology SWOT for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That language is you'll see again in ACGME documentation. There are multiple elements that the PEC can use to meet their goals, and this is the list that's delineated, and I'll review it quickly. The elements that the PEC covers include the curriculum, outcomes from prior APEs, ACGME letters of notification, including citations, areas for improvement and comments, quality and safety of patient care, well-being, recruitment and retention, workforce diversity, engagement in QI and patient safety, scholarly activity, ACGME resident, fellow, and faculty surveys, and written evaluations of the programs. And the end function of the PEC is to evaluate the program's missions and aims, strengths, areas for improvement, and threats. And this annual review, including the action plan, must be distributed to and discussed with the members of the teaching faculty and the fellows. And it should be submitted to the DIO. That is the end of the kind of specifications from the ACGME, but we recognize that these can be interpreted in lots of different ways across programs. So that's why we have our panelists here. And with that, I will turn it over to Brooke to ask some questions.
Okay, again, thank you, Heidi and Wayne, for being here. The first question I want to ask you guys is, who sits on your PEC and how often does your PEC meet? Because I know lots of different programs do it different ways, but I would love to hear what you guys do. So I guess we could start with Wayne.
Yes, I thank you for inviting me. I would not call myself an expert, but I'm someone who's made a lot of mistakes and learned from them. So we have traditionally done about 3 meetings a year because there's a lot included in those recommendations and requirements. So we do 3 meetings a year. And again, at each meeting, I have sort of outlined different content areas to go over. And then it doesn't feel like quite such a heavy lift to do everything in one meeting. And again, but we deal with any compliance issues, we deal with fellow performance issues, we deal with planning for the program evaluation, and then any results from surveys and other things that help us give information about the program. And we also try to look forward to the future to try to anticipate issues that are ongoing, trying to be innovative as we approach different education goals, So it's a way to get some bright people in the same room to bounce ideas off of each other. So that's a sort of general summary.
Thank you. Heidi, do you do things differently? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, trying to make sure that there's no background noise from my dog, etc. So we do things a little differently. We do the heavy lifting approach. We have the formal PEC committee once a year at the end of the year, but essentially we use our fellowship retreat, which is a whole day event, as the prelude to that. And so our fellowship retreat is all of our fellows and our program director and APD. And the fellows are actually responsible for presenting it, and they divvy up the workload by year, and they pick apart the fellowship in every part. So clinical, scholarly activity, research, QI, wellness. They pick apart the whole fellowship in everything that we do for clinical rotations, how much time for scholarly activity, mentors and quality of mentors, projects that are available, what mentors have worked out and what mentors have not. And so they come not only with what are we doing, what works, what doesn't work, but their suggestions for how to reorganize the fellowship, which I always have to laugh because they kind of swing the pendulum of how they want to do things about every 3 years. And then we use that to format our agenda for our PEC, which covers, we send out an attachment to our PEC faculty, which encompasses the chiefs, which is 3 or 4 people, chief fellows, the program director and APD, the medical directors of all 3 clinical sites, the head of research, and our division chief. So that's our PEC committee. So everybody who's a major stakeholder and in command of a big portion of the fellowship process at some point. And we go through the surveys and basically do a SWOT analysis of how are our site exams, our fellow and faculty evaluations of the program, and then basically dive through in each section. And I can go more into that when you're ready, of kind of what encompasses each section. But those are who we have on it. And I guess we do a little bit of it at each of the CCC meetings, because we discuss a lot of those things about performance problems, difficulties with rotations on a more ongoing basis, because we meet with the fellows every single month before the fellows have an hour with us every month behind closed doors before the fellowship committee, which the fellows also sit on with all the faculty that are on that committee, so that they can air their grievances and problems before they become big. So every month is just a check-in for wellness, and it's a secure place for them to talk about anything they want. So I guess, although we don't call it the PEC, we have multiple little things that build up into that at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think our program does something very similar in that we use our retreat because we have certain faculty. It's not just the program directors, and we use that as our big overview of kind of tearing apart the program and building it back up. And I guess that kind of goes into like, how do you set your PEC agenda? Wayne, I guess you could answer. Oh, you're muted now. You would think by now we would all have this down, but I still don't.
So the big agenda is for the planning for the program evaluation, and there are 16 different topics that we cover, and I send out information, gather information, then send it out to faculty before that big meeting, including site exam results, scholarly activity, evaluations, milestone data, procedure logs, develop a list of all development activities we've done with faculty for faculty development, teaching evaluations of faculty, surveys of graduates. We do surveys of graduates about every 3 years. That information, board pass rates, and then we do 2 program evaluations, both the ACGME program evaluation as well as an in-house program evaluation, which I think allows a little bit more detail for fellows and faculty both to respond about their concerns about the program. We look at ACGME's annual, we look at our goals and objectives to make sure those are updated. And then we look at recruitment and look at diversity and all the things that we need to pay attention to for that. And then, so that's sort of the big meeting. And then the other 2 meetings, we deal more with the nuts and bolts of should we add a rotation for this, or do we, get based on fellow feedback, we again meet with fellows on a periodic basis and get ideas for curriculum changes that may need to occur. So I guess again, that's sort of a brief overview.
So we do something, I guess, similarly. We go over all of the fellow milestones and all of that data and scholarly progress at certainly the 2 CCC meetings at the beginning of every fellowship committee every month. And the fellowship committee are the 2 program directors, all of the 3 clinical medical directors of all the sites, the research director, our division chief. All the fellows are invited to the fellowship committee, and because they are an important part of our recruitment and interview process. And we have 2 rotating members who are usually junior faculty who are more interested in fellowship education or being involved. They get a 2-year stint. So the core people are really all the leadership of the clinical sites, the research, the division chief, the program directors, we're the constant. And then we rotate in 2 new faculty members every year. And then the fellows are always on it. And the fellows have to give a scholarly update on their projects at the beginning of every month of every fellowship committee. So it keeps them tidy that every month they have to give a 2-minute blurb about their project. Where are they? So they don't get too far afield, and then people can ask questions. And at the beginning of each fellows meeting, which precedes that, we go over their procedure logs, making sure that people are remembering to do those things. We have procedural based competencies, the CEXs that we go through just to make sure that people are on target. But then when we come to the PEC meeting, we have both the fellow, the resident, and faculty survey, and all of this is sent out to the committee ahead of time to review. The annual survey of the program that are both the faculty and fellows fill out, the board and site exams. And then we ask them for suggested program improvements and related to rotations, wellness, patient care, diversity, inclusion, scholarly activity. We go over again the same kinds of things, the opportunities at both the university and in the department for faculty development and kind of advanced fellow development, because a lot of that crosses over. The senior fellows tend to go to a lot of the junior faculty development courses because they're welcome to do that at the university level. And then really talk about our clinical curriculum, the didactics. We've moved more into flipped classroom this year, which is great. I'm sure Heather's happy to hear that. Trying to get people who are not familiar to do that. And then research, just basically taking each of the pieces, looking at mentors, projects, and then also graduating fellow surveys, where they've gone, et cetera.
Does anybody have any questions about those topics that they wanted to ask? Melissa, I'm not sure if you've gotten any directly. Sorry about the chat situation.
I haven't, but if anyone wants to chat with me directly, I can compile. And while we're waiting, I have a question. We've talked a little bit about what you do discuss in the PEC. Is there anything that you don't discuss with the PEC, like topics that you tend to avoid, or is everything fair game?
At least on our end, everything is fair game. It's a tough love, open all the wounds kind of. And usually some of that comes out in the fellow retreat, if there are any, but I think a lot of those wounds tend to be headed off by meeting with the fellows every month. So if we hear about problems, we hear about them in close proximity to when they happen and they don't snowball and build in people's minds.
Do you meet with all of your fellows individually every month?
No, we meet with them as a group.
Okay, because I was like, oh my God, that's a lot of hours if you meet with them all.
And they have their own both scholarship mentors, they're project mentors, but they also are assigned a clinical mentor who's their open door person that they meet with quarterly.
Okay.
But we meet with all the fellows over lunch, plus Zoom for the people who are on service in different locations every month. Just gives them a time to check in and complain. We can fix some things, we can't fix others. If the refrigerator is broken in the call room and there's no place to store breast milk, we can fix that, right? That's an easy call to Best Buy. Other things are a little bit more difficult to fix.
I reinforce that having a very open communication policy is the key to true program improvement. If fellows don't feel comfortable in saying what's really concerning them, then that's a problem. And so it's a trust relationship. So I think the whole process is really, you have to start with trust between the fellows and the program leadership, that and that's built through experience. When they do bring up something that's hard, that there's not a punitive reaction, but hey, let's try to fix this reaction.
And also feeling like what they say is confidential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And trying to figure out how to fix problems without letting people know where the source was. And I think that's a little bit of a skill. And that's why we don't even have our program coordinator in those monthly meetings with the fellows. It's just the two program directors. So it's really a behind closed doors. You are free. You can even, crank and moan about us. It's fine. It's everything's fair game, and that's their free time to say whatever they want.
Okay, Bless, I think you have a lot of questions. You've told me now.
Yeah, I have several in the chat. So the first question is about dissemination of the information from the PEC to the faculty. So how do you relate the results of the PEC meetings to the entire faculty? And then the question is, or do you? And remember, that is one part of the ACGME requirements.
Yeah, I think it's important for transparency with some limitations, and the word confidentiality I think is very important, because you don't want to, you want to make sure that fellows do know that if they bring up something confidentially, then it can be relayed in a non-identifying manner. But I think it's very important to be very transparent about the things you're doing well and about the things that need to be improved. So yes, a full report I think is very important.
We do, we send out a summary of, basically we take the agenda and we fill in with what were the results of each of those items on the agenda. We disseminate that to the faculty and present it at the faculty meeting the following month. And again, as Wayne said, if there are issues that relate to a specific faculty member, that goes to our division chief, and she deals with it directly with that faculty member. And that's not part of, for some things, we try to take those issues and make them more generalizable so that everybody may learn from a particular type of incident without it being pinpointed to a person.
there's an inherent challenge I have found over 20 years of doing this. The people, and yes, you have to do that. You have to generalize. However, the people that need to hear the message typically don't think it applies to them.
Which is why we send it to the division chief to meet with
Right,
them in person.
exactly.
That kicks that right up the can.
Right.
And conversely, the people that are usually doing well but fixate on negative things think that everything is about them.
Yes, always.
One of the other questions, and we've certainly heard a variety, is someone said that they're limited to in their PECs to 2 hours, and they're wondering how you cover all 16 things. So we've heard two approaches. Wayne said meeting 3 times a year and covering 16 things. Heidi had mentioned meeting once a year, but having many meetings that lead up to that. Are there any other pro tips in how to cover the appropriate hours and how frequently to set up the meetings? Or
I think sending out the information, the faculty surveys, the fellow surveys, and asking people to review those before they come to the meeting. And we have the site exams, all of the whole packet that's going to go out for the agenda with all the data goes out to them ahead of time, about 2 weeks ahead. And so we also we have 2 hours. Nobody wants to do anything more than that. That just becomes onerous. And so we hone in on the things where on like the surveys, hone into the things that are the important nuggets. You don't have to go through every single score. Highlight a couple of things, it's the feedback sandwich. These things we did great. These things we did a little less great. Why do we think that is the case? And again, because we don't have to talk about fellow performance in that meeting, because we've already done that. I think it's more of a general big program meeting, and ask them to come not only with complaints, but suggestions.
The other part of this is I think it needs to be thought of as a continuous quality improvement project, not a once a year project, even though there's a formal meeting once a year. We review the action plan at least three times a year, and make sure that we are remembering what we said we wanted to do, that we're actually making appropriate progress in those areas. And so it keeps the little problems from becoming big problems. And so that's actually a big time saver, because if you're constantly paying attention and constantly making improvements, then you don't have so many big problems to solve when you do your official meeting.
I think that kind of goes to Heidi's thing of the once a month fellow meeting. That's kind of like a PEC all the time.
Right.
You're addressing a lot of those issues throughout the year with all of the fellows.
And we've actually also started to have, because we're growing a lot, we're almost doubling the size of our fellowship over the next couple of years from 7 to 12. And so we have a big growing pain or growing situation with not only our clinical volume, but our program. And so we suddenly have more fellows, we have more opportunity, but all more responsibility to find scholarly projects, to find mentors, and also interface with our practitioner pool. And how does that work? And so we've also interfaced meetings that are just the fellows with the nurse practitioner leads at our 3 sites to discuss how do they want the workflow to be, how do they want the teaching of the residents. And at other sites, we have nurse practitioner students because we have an NNP school here at the School of Nursing. So our fellows are also responsible for teaching NNP students. So how does that interface into one unified front so that the practitioners and the fellows are working together and don't get persnickety with each other? This keeps everybody on the right. So a couple times a year, probably quarterly, the fellows meet with the practitioner leads.
Does anybody have a nurse practitioner officially on their PEC?
I have to think whether we had the 3, because we just instituted leads a year ago. I don't remember if they were at our last PEC, but I think that that's a tremendously good idea if you have a lead NNP at a site or lead practitioner at a site, because I think they have a lot of insight to the fellows and the process of what happens at night, especially, that sometimes you don't know.
I agree. I think we invite, as Heidi said, we invite all our faculty and practitioners to these meetings, and practitioners always have good insights about how things really work.
Excellent. Well, that's the end of our moderated session. I will open it up to any other questions that people have before we stop the recording, but then we'll continue on for the next half an hour so that we can chat some more. Any last minute burning questions?
I think it also can be helpful if people want that we can, we're in the process, having the forms committee, trying to put together a Dropbox for ONTPD and have like a forms toolkit. We may be able, maybe Wayne and I and a couple of other people can put up some sample agendas
Yep.
to get people, they can take a look at those and pull them down and see how that fits. They're basically SWOT analysis.
I would love to have some forms easily accessible. So thank you.
And Heidi, tell us, in case there's a new person watching, what is a SWOT analysis?
So it's basically that, instead of calling it challenges, you know, it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to your program. And I think it's trying to be really honest in each of those. Easy to talk about your strengths. I think it's a little harder to talk about what are your weaknesses and what are the threats, and then figure out how to turn them into opportunities, you know, how to turn that thorn into a rose. And I think we do that. I think that was a big thing a few years, probably more like 5-6 years ago, where all the programs had to do a SWOT analysis in a big formal way for ACGME. But I think approaching it that way each time helps keep you thinking about the pros and cons of everything that you do and how you might be able to tweak things to make them better. I mean, to be honest, would any of us, without some encouragement from the ACGME, really take the time to go through in as many detail? We've always had a fellowship retreat in this institution. So that was always part of the program for 20 some odd years, which is great. But I don't know that we're all so busy. Would we really take the time to dig apart our programs so carefully every year if we didn't have at least some push externally? Maybe not. Maybe. I'd like to think so, but we might not do it quite as formally as we do.
That is a great summary. I'm going to end the recording so people can talk freely, but I felt like that was a good thing to end on.